do we have 3 volunteers to kind of model more facility? And what we'll do here is what is a typical exercise. You kind of have a sheet. You can do this exercise again if you want, or you can kind of do it in your class. The full exercise takes about 50 minutes or so, but you
others think? Yes.
I think that having the government take a stronger role makes a lot of sense because the one thing they have the resources to do that individuals and schools don't is market this as a real problem. If a parent tells their child one thing, it's a family contained matter. If a school does something, there's going to be back and forth, but even then it's fairly contained. The government has the resources to market this as a broad issue with real broad consequences that where you can see that even if somebody else is taking this action, in the long run it's going to impact you because if they are, say, in poverty and they're eating bad food, they're going to have health problems, which you as a taxpayer then end up with the bill for via Medicare and Medicaid. I think also that's particularly helpful if the government wants to take the approach of increasing regulation when it comes to advertising junk food to children. Because just a single family or a school is going to have a real hard time convincing people that this is a potentially bad thing on par with, say, alcohol or cigarettes. Whereas the government has the resources to really kind of push that viewpoint. So I think it makes, strictly from a resource point of view, a lot of sense for the government to up their game on this one.
All right. So what you're really saying is that you feel like they have the resources, they have the ability to make this a greater or broader issue and to use their resources in terms of taxation and regulation to further push that agenda. How do others feel about this issue?
I agree, but I'm just curious, which government? I mean, the federal government or the state government?
Right? That's an important question.
It just varies so much from state to state.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm thinking of Herman Park, and I don't know how many people know that Herman Park is actually not a state-funded park, right?
Interesting.
It's a private park that is open to the public, but it's private. So, or that, the other big park that I used to live at was donated by this really wealthy lady to the state.
You raise a really great point. Also, in terms of regulation, so you can have federal regulation, state regulation, city regulation, like the ban of large sodas in New York City, right?
Which went over really well.
Yeah, exactly. So things like that. So I think Raquel brings up a really good point. So what do you all think about that? Where do we draw this line of regulation, or is it gray?
Well, I think we should use the subsidiarity principle in this. Yeah. So what the I'm not used to federal states, but those things which should be solved better at federal level should be solved. So I think the taxes can be such an issue. Whereas I think the management of landscape and parks and so on, I cannot imagine that the federal government would deal with this problem.
So you're thinking more federal taxation regulation, and then more localized funding for things such as parks and
I think
municipalities.
For each level, each type of government is so one has to choose.
Yeah. Wendy, did I see?
No, I didn't hear anything.
Oh, okay.
I was thinking how great it would be if we could tax junk food. Then I was wondering, I was thinking about the McDonald's lobby, like how hard that would be against lobbyists.
Well, I mean, we tax alcohol, we tax tobacco. In Colorado, we tax marijuana. So these sin taxes, right? And the idea of the sin tax is it's a win-win, right? Either they use less of the product because it's too expensive, but if they use the product, then we get additional taxes to do good things, right? So the idea of taxing junk food to subsidize healthy food, right? So the salad at McDonald's is as cheap as a double cheeseburger. The problem is, for me, I know my parents own a daycare center in Houston as I grew up in a pretty low-income part of town, so they had a lot of government programs, and every year she would go to a training about what kind of food they had to give to the kids, and she said every year the training changed, right? So she'd come home, it's like, oh, milk's bad now, can't have milk, and next year, oh, no, milk's good, so that line of what's junk food and what's not junk food.
There's food lobbyists.
When it's a political issue, right, so to what degree, what do you say is junk food that gets taxed? To what degree do they add vitamin C to a potato chip, so now they say it's healthy, So I think the implementation of that's going to be a little bit more difficult than, tax junk food and, healthy food, right? What's junk and what's healthy is going to be a politicized issue, but I'm not saying it's not worth trying to figure that out.
What about some of these trade-offs? Are there any trade-offs on there that you are particularly drawn to or want to discuss?
I think with one issue we're dealing with Fort Collins is we have a new tax coming up, like an extension of it's called the Building on Basics for like large programs. So they come up with a list of programs and we vote. So outside of the budget, there are new cool things. And one of them is a recreation center for the south part of town. Now in Fort Collins, north part is a little poor. The south part is a little bit more well off. North part already has some public recreation centers, right? The south part does not, so we need a recreation center, but since there's not one, we have several businesses that are health clubs, right? So if they build a recreation center on the south part of town, it's probably going to cause some of those health clubs to close. Because now the government is providing a service that is the private industry, you know? So I can see some of those tensions in a sense of, if we're saying now it's a government responsibility to provide places to exercise and sports programs and leagues and stuff like that, then that means the private industry, you're taking that away from private industry, right? So I think that's going to be tough to see how that kind of plays out.
I think that's an interesting point you make, but also it adds choice, right?
Yeah, but then for the people who can pay for these sport programs are not really the people who are needing them. And there is a lot of people who, well, they just, I'm thinking that more parkways, exercise equipment in a small neighborhood, especially in neighborhoods who are really low income. I think that should be also something that the government could help on doing that. Another thing also that I think the food desert also is an area that nobody speaks, and I mean I really didn't know much about food deserts until I went to USDA on a fellowship, and then I learned about this term, and I came back to Houston because we don't see food deserts. When I look at the map, I was really surprised how many food deserts we have here in the city. So I think that's a role also for the local, state, and even the federal role.
Others?
Well, I agree with Maria. I was trying to move to a cheaper apartment. So then, I don't remember which ward it is in Houston, but I just map it because I don't have a car. So I was like, where's the grocery store? There is a ward in Houston that has no grocery stores within its borders. Absolutely none. And I was like, I can't live there. I don't know how people live there. So that's a food desert that we have, right, in Houston. And then, but also I think, well, I don't know, I just, it's not only the parks for poor neighborhoods, but the safety. Like, is it really safe for them to go outside? Do their parents feel safe for the children to be playing? Are there drug dealers? Are they going to be shot? So if you don't have that safety, then it's very hard for parents to say, oh yeah, let me just send my child to the park.
Others who we haven't heard from yet?
About a minute or so.
I'm running out of steam.
Oh, we can stop there.
Okay.
Maybe it's a good starting point. Okay. So,
I felt fine.
she has a lot of experience kind of coming in, right? So, I noticed for sure, like, most of us were liking this approach, right? So one of the interventions you made is, what do you think about those trade-offs, right?
Yeah.
So that was kind of a transition question and a push on that.
Oh, and I think that's a good point. It's like once you do it a couple times, I think you feel a lot more comfortable than like completely stressed out. Yeah.
So all three of y'all chose to stand, right? I don't know if y'all have. The reason you made that choice was you more comfortable. I mean, y'all are used to being teachers, probably, so you're used to kind of standing in front of the room in a sense, right? Do you normally, if you do mediations?
No,
mediation is normally just between
it's
two people, right? Or
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'll like set up the table so everyone's kind of equal.
Yeah.
But so I do kind of like deliberative style in my classes a lot.
Okay.
So that's why I felt more comfortable standing. Because I kind of treated it like that.
the distinction between mediation and deliberation. I'd be curious if you have any kind of initial thoughts with that. I have some, but I mean, do you see a difference between kind of a public kind of the public showing up and a mediation. At least in my mind, a mediation is normally, it's more stakeholders, right?
Yeah.
People are coming in with a specific stake that is a little bit different.
So I'm also like a trained like focus group facilitator.
Okay.
So I see more overlap between deliberation and focus groups than I do with mediation.
Okay.
Even though I think all three of them like share a lot of the same characteristics of how you facilitate them. But yeah, I just feel as you're just trying to like gather opinions more so, and that's why I see a lot of overlap between deliberation and focus groups. But then you're also trying to get to some sort of consensus, or at least share different perspectives, which then you get more of that mediation. So.
No thoughts or questions about that one? We all like government.
Do you bring your own ideas as you are doing this, like actually she just finished, and then can she kind of like do a question again based on something that she thought that we didn't cover? Can she?
Yeah, I mean, again, it becomes, it's a finite distinction or gray area distinction between, are you asking that question because this is an important issue to this topic we need to talk about, or something I think is important, right? You know, so you're trying to distinguish in a sense that you're not asking that question because that's what you think, right? You're asking that question from a process perspective that this is an important part of the conversation that's missing, right? So that's where, and those two, that distinction sometimes is not a distinction in some senses, right? But you don't want your own opinion to come out too much, right? That you're pushing. So you don't want to say, like, you know, I told several stories here, like in my city, you would want to do that as a facilitator, right? Of kind of, here's an example from me, unless it's really the examples just to kind of help them think through something else in some way.
And Maria had to step out during it, but you know, there are other ways that do not put your personal self to move the topic. Like you can point to the placemat, right, and say, are there other questions on here or topics that you think are important? So that's kind of doing what you're saying, but maybe without putting your own
or you
biases.
bring, you know, we talked earlier when you weren't here about the empty chair. We sometimes put an empty chair in the middle of the room and kind of tell people, if you want, you can bring someone and put it in that chair, right? To bring it, or as a facilitator, you can, right? You know, so like I was just kind of joking. We all kind of like government, right? So we didn't have the person here that's like, government bad, Texas bad, kind of, you know. So you could have brought that in, right? What would someone say here that feels government is already doing too much and taxes are too high, that we're relying too often on government to solve our problems, right? You know, so there's a lot of mechanisms as a facilitator. If you feel a voice is missing, you don't want to fill that voice with your voice, right? That void with your voice. But there's ways you could do to kind of open the conversation up so that gets filled in some ways. So with this one, kind of do that same mechanism. What were some of the underlying values relevant to this topic? Again, we tend to explicitly talk about, right? But what are some of the things that we care about that were relevant to this topic? Health, right?
Yeah.
So clearly health, both in terms of individual health. I mean, the framing of this as childhood obesity is important, right? Because it's that notion that children don't have as much power to make their own choices, right?
Yeah.
So it becomes a little bit more of a societal responsibility in a sense, in some ways. But then that goes directly into kind of another value of kind of valuing parents having control, right? You know,
Yeah.
it seems to be violating something when we tell parents how to parent, right?
Yeah.
So you know, the freedom, parental, I don't know, there's not really a phrase that we use, right? Parental freedom or parental kind of authority in a way.
Yeah.
That we recognize, you know, so that right there is this tension, right? Like, oh man, we feel we need to do something to help these kids, but then we also don't want to violate that parental authority or parental freedom or whatever. Right? So those are these two. What else?
I think human like value or human worth. I think it came up in both approach 1 and approach 2.
Talk a little
In
bit more
terms of
about
like
that.
the stigmatization and like Jerome talked about like bullying and that deals. I mean,
So that compassion might be part of that, right?
potentially,
By the
yeah.
way, one of my favorite probing questions is, talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, yeah.
That's a probing question, right? Someone says something, it's interesting, you know, but they seem to be, they finish talking. Talk a little bit more about that. Is this a great probing question, right? Keep talking, right? Yeah, so that human value, that compassion, that
Recognizing
respect,
that it's not just numbers, but that these are actual
real people.
individuals with value and worth and feelings, and that you need to respect and think about what sort of how those regulations might impact that individual.
Okay.
Yeah, and going along with that, I think understanding education as a holistic process instead of, a number on a test, right? So recognizing that there's a lot more that goes into educating the student.
Yeah, so that, a lot of times when we do work on curriculum, that tension between the kind of a basics or STEM even,
Right.
and the whole child, right?
Right.
I remember we did actually a big STEM project for the governor's office.
The last couple of years,
way back when.
one of the reasons why that
and
program
it
worked
was a
so
lot of
well.
funding to kind of have
15 new students and at least 15 returning
They
students.
hired these.
So I just did, after the first 2 weeks of class, we have an all-day workshop. So we have a 9 to 5 workshop that we did last Saturday.
Education.
And so the new students go into training, but all the experienced students come back. Right, so I do what I just did, talk about facilitator responsibilities, basically, and then we do this exercise. But this exercise, we have 3 new students in each, so 1 for each approach. And then typically at least 1 or 2, sometimes 3 experienced students, so it's a small group. So they do the 10 minutes of facilitation and then they do 8 minutes of debrief. Like, what questions did you ask, how did it work, and that kind of
STEM, right?
But
the question we need
what
to
it
ask
also
is,
does, I
are
didn't
you
realize
in
this
support of
was
increasing
so
STEM,
blunt,
even if
a
that
few
means
years
we
ago,
have to give up?
that I'm putting the senior associates, the second semester students, in the place that they're
That's the question.
right?
We're gonna do more.
Because I'm walking around hearing, they're repeating what I said is training and that kind of stuff, right?
Or maybe.
But then I think they take so much ownership of the program because of that, that I'm putting my trust in them, of them training these new students, right? And you see the pride in it. So that this model of having this 2-semester, I don't know if you're able to do the 2-semester thing or not, but the fact that I rely on my experienced students to train the new students, I think really builds up kind of pride in the senior associates, right?
Some civic teachers
in a way that
want
really
there
kind of
to be a test.
self-perpetuates itself, right?
Because if there's a test, then it becomes a more important subject, right? But then if there's a test, then they have to teach, there's a consequence way to make it a little easier, innovation,
Oh,
flexibility.
specific,
You
like,
need to, as a facilitator, make lots of mistakes, right? Mistakes is what we learn from,
But,
right? So if you're worried about making a mistake, that's exactly what I need, right? Because I can tell students, no, don't play the expert role, but it's a lot easier to bring that lesson down when someone plays the expert role, and then we can kind of explain how that
So
works
you
really
don't have
well.
a test in social
So don't be worried about doing that, because we need you to do that.
We have English, we have math, and we have science starts a little bit later.
they're still teaching the subject.
Yeah, there's just kind of
Alright.
There's controversy because some teachers want standardized testing.
So one more?
Because if there's standardized testing, more resources. There's another one saying, no, once we have standardized testing,
You're too easy to talk to them around.
I'm not gonna get to the topic because I don't think that we have.
Testing needs standardization, right?
So you want to be a participant?
No,
Consistency,
no,
which means everyone's doing the same
I'll
thing.
facilitate if you want me to.
There's
I'll
no
just-
stuff about that, right? But on the flip side of that is there's less
I'm
innovation.
already
There's less
kind of
flexibility.
trained, so I feel like it's maybe not the best.
So in
for
some
me
ways,
to
if
do
every
it.
teacher is teaching it the same way across the state, right? There's some good things about that, right? And that means if you're training more
Yeah, I'm more interested in like mediation.
You're kind of on the same thing, you got the same
Yeah.
textbook, and then you
Okay, y'all have a preference in terms of the approach. So the first approach, so we set up the topic, right? So at least in the United States, this is probably generally international issue as well, right? But with obesity rates, if you look at kind of the last 30 years, increase in obesity rates. I know in Colorado, we're actually in really good shape in Colorado. Literally. And I think we're 50, number 1 in terms of fitness. But even Colorado, the obesity rates compared to 30 years ago have skyrocketed, right? So generally it's kind of seen by a lot of people as an epidemic, like things have to change in a way. There's lots of information in terms of the impact on society, in terms of kind of public health costs and those type of things. And if you're obese as a child, it can be obese as an adult, and those type of things.
Then we have the flip side, which is education.
Generally, we kind of start, I think, from this common ground, okay, something has got to change, right? We can't kind of stay like this, right? So this is the 3 approaches. I'd like to do these kind of approaches in some ways where each approach focuses on a specific stakeholder, right? That they should really take a lot more responsibility for this. This in particular kind of reinforces the notion I talked about earlier that, it's not about talking through the different one approach. We're not assuming only one of these entities, but clearly all 3 have some responsibility. But it structures the conversation. What happens when we're really focused in on what is the role of schools here? What is the role of government? And spend some dedicated time to think about that. One of the other aspects of the United model that I think works really well, with general issues, what tends to happen, just like with legislature and policy, is one solution is brought up. Let's do this, right?
But if it's a wicked problem, that solution is going to have flaws. Right? And as a society, we're really good at pointing out flaws, right? Especially in an adversarial system, right? So we have a problem, we all agree it's a problem. People say, let's do this to solve the problem. That gets torn apart. Okay, never mind, right? Let's do this to solve the problem. That gets torn apart. Okay, never mind. Listen, so we never do anything because we're almost like waiting for the magic bullet. We're waiting for a solution that has no flaws, and it doesn't exist. So what an NIF approach does, here's a common problem, here's 3 broad solutions to it. Again, each one has flaws, right? But there's also that notion that since we're looking at 3, and hopefully those 3 kind of cover a lot of the ground, right? Doesn't leave a huge kind of solution out, that we recognize by the end of it, well, you know what, none of them are great.
It's pretty easy for me to feed my kids well.
So it's able to get past that hump of waiting for the magic bullet.
So she can spend the time to kind of.
So that's why we're not making the argument that really only one of these things we should do. But let's spend some time talking through what happens if we really focus in on those.
So there's equity kind of justice.
If we're doing this for real, so we'd set up the problem, kind of establish. We don't have a video for this one, but that establish, how do these is keep their. And then we're going to spend about 10 minutes on each approach facilitating, which is not long enough to really have a full conversation with them, but
focus on this.
Getting practice facilitating. And we'll spend some time kind of debriefing, talking about specific interventions, and I'll be trying to take some notes as we do that.
How do we transcend them, or how do we?
So do we want to do approach 1, approach 2, approach 3?
Or those kind of things.
Is that right? Or does someone have an approach that they'd like to do?
One of the reasons why my program works so well, I have 15 new students and at least 15 returning students. So I just did, after the first 2 weeks of class, we have an all-day workshop. So we have a 9 to 5 workshop that we did last Saturday, right? And so the new students are the ones trained, but all of the experienced students come back, right? So I do what I just did, talk about facilitator responsibilities, basic moves, and then we do this exercise. But this exercise, we have 3 new students in each, so 1 for each approach, and then typically at least 1 or 2, sometimes 3 experienced students. So it's a small group. So they do a 10 minutes facilitation, and then they do 8 minutes of debrief. Like, hey, what questions did you ask, and how did that work, and that kind of. But what that also does, I didn't realize that until the few years ago, that I'm putting the senior associates, the second semester students, in the places they're the experts, right? As I'm walking around here, they're repeating what I said in training and that kind of stuff, right? But I think they take so much ownership of the program because of that I'm putting my trust in them and them training these new students, right? And you see the pride in it. So this model of having this 2-semester, I don't know if you're able to do the 2-semester thing or not, but the fact that I rely on my experienced students to train the new students, I think really builds up kind of pride in the work and the senior associates, right? In a way that really kind of self-perpetuates itself, right? As we go. So, do I have 3 volunteers? Let me couch it this way to make it a little bit easier. We need you as a facilitator to make lots of mistakes, because mistakes is what really we learn from, right? So if you're really not making a mistake, that's exactly what I need, right? Because I can tell students, no, don't play the expert role, but it's a lot easier to bring that lesson down when someone plays the expert role, and then we kind of explain how that didn't work so well. Right? So don't be worried about doing badly, because we need you to do badly so we can all learn from it. Did that work? So,
So you convinced me with that.
All right, we got 1. We got 2, right? So 1 more. None Americans are going for it. You're too engaged in the topic, is that what it is? Or?
I'm not even engaged in the topic because I don't think that any of
So you want to be a participant?
No, I'll facilitate if you want me to. I'm already kind of trained, so I feel like it's maybe not the best for me to do it.
Well, no, but modeling good facilitation is always good.
Okay.
It'll be interesting because you're training more on conflict resolution.
I'm trained in like mediation.
Yeah, but it'll be interesting to see the difference.
Yeah.
Okay, do y'all have a preference in terms of the approach? So the first approach, so let me set up the topic, right? So at least in the United States, this is probably generally a national issue as well, right? But obesity rates, if you look at kind of the last 30 years, increasing obesity rates. I know in Colorado, we're actually in really good shape in Colorado. And I think we're 50, number one in terms of fitness, but even Colorado, the obesity rates compared to 30 years ago have skyrocketed, right? So generally it's kind of seen by a lot of people as an epidemic, like things have to change in a way. There's lots of information in terms of the impact on society, in terms of kind of public health costs and those type of things. And if you're obese as a child, you tend to be obese as an adult and all those type of things. So generally we kind of start, I think, from this common ground. Okay, something's got to change, right? We can't kind of stay like this, right? So then this is the three approaches. I like to do these kind of approaches in some ways where each approach focuses on a specific stakeholder, right? That they should really take a lot more responsibility for this, right? This in particular kind of reinforces the notion I talked about earlier that, it's not about talking to them and picking one approach. We're not assuming only one of these entities. Now, clearly all three have some responsibility here, right? But it structures the conversation. What happens when we're really focused in on what is the role of schools here? What is the role of government, right? And spend some dedicated time to think about that, right? Because one of the other aspects of the NIF model that I think works really well, the general issues, what tends to happen, especially like with legislature and policy, is one solution is brought up. Let's do this, right? But if it's a wicked problem, that solution is going to have flaws, right? And as a society, we're really good at pointing out flaws, right? Especially in an adversarial system, right? So we have a problem, we all agree it's a problem. People say, let's do this to solve the problem. That gets torn apart. Okay, never mind, right? Let's do this to solve the problem. That gets torn apart. Okay, never mind. And so we never do anything because we're almost like waiting for the magic bullet. We're waiting for the solution that has no flaws when it doesn't exist, right? So what an NIF approach does is, okay, here's a common problem. Here's three broad solutions to it. Again, each one has flaws, right? But there's also that notion that since we're looking at three, and hopefully those three kind of cover a lot of the ground, right? Doesn't leave a huge kind of potential solution out, that we recognize by the end of it, well, none of them are great, but we got to do something, right? So that it's able to kind of get past that hump of waiting for the magic bullet in a sense. Does that make sense? So that's why this covers, we're not making the argument that really only one of these entities should do, but let's spend some time talking through what happens if we really focus in on one of those entities, right? Now, if we're doing this for real, so we'd set up a problem, kind of establish, we don't have a video for this one or anything like that, establish, childhood disease key term, and then we're gonna spend about 10 minutes on each approach, facilitating, which is not long enough to really have a full conversation with it, but again, we're just getting practice facilitating. And then we'll spend some time kind of debriefing, talking about specific interventions, and I'll be trying to take some notes as we do that. So do we want to do approach 1, approach 2, approach 3? All right? Or does someone have an approach that they'd like to do? So what we would do, and I know you just got this, right? We have extra, here we go. We have extra skill. Oh, yeah. I guess I probably need one. And I don't know if you want to just do it from there, if you want to, why don't you come here?
To have the eye contact.
Yeah. And some facilitators prefer to stand. There is advantages and disadvantages. So if one of you want to stand, you're welcome to. When you're standing, you have a little bit more control. Like one of the techniques if someone talks too much is to kind of walk over and ask them, like almost block them out, like basketball. Or if two people are kind of chatting, you can kind of walk over and they'll probably stop chatting. So there's some things, but obviously if I'm standing, the attention is much more on me, right? So I've always tended to prefer to sit, but I'm losing that. I can't use that spatial thing when I'm sitting, right? So if you prefer to stand, if that's more natural to you, then that's fine. Let me grab my phone so I can time things here. So try to start off with a quick summary, but at the same time recognize that people have this in front of them, right? So you don't need to read this to them. You can kind of say, you can look on here, here's the general approach, and then think about the 5 basic moves. Don't try to do all 5 basic moves, right? But just think about the 5 basic moves and give us some examples.
No, we don't need to split into the groups.
No, so you'll do approach 1 for 10 minutes, and then you'll do approach 2, and then you'll do approach 3 is just examples of facilitation.
Okay, so we've got the problem of childhood obesity, and it's not only the problem of the US, it's a worldwide problem, mostly with developed societies. of course, it has also its influence on the health of people which are full grown or mature. It is of course also about the problem of public financial spending on health insurance, on healthcare, and well, we have to discuss four types of approaches. First, one is approach says that obesity is primarily the result of personal choices. First, it is treatment should be personal as well. Do we have anyone who would have some comments on this type of approach? Ivan, maybe you got some.
Sometimes you can pick on your friends to get things going.
I don't have children, so I have the opinion. I think that children learn from their parents their nutrition habits, so in a way I agree with this statement that this is the result of personal choice. However, I think society should do something with this as the problem is increasing.
Okay, for sure the society is at least bearing the cost of it. So that's your point. Okay, can we have another point of view?
I agree that to some degree there's individual responsibility, but I don't think that the answer to the problem is putting it on individual and family responsibility. You have to think about things like the social determinants of health, inequality, those things that are impacting individuals, making it harder to make these healthy choices, lower education, all of these factors go into obesity. So I think that the first approach probably isn't going to be our best approach.
Thank you for your statement. Even so, the corridor here at the university, there are some courses, some workshops on this. So I can see that it is a problem which is also identified by the academic community. And Wendy, as a member of the academic.
I was going to agree with Ashley. I was going to say something kind of similar, but I was just thinking about, yes, and I agree with you too. I mean, I see the role of personal choice, but I just think that if we're talking about solutions, we have to really recognize the limitations too. I mean, quality food is so expensive, not only in terms of money, but in terms of the time that it takes. I have 2 children, I understand that. And then I think about like children growing up in cities and access to public space to be able to go outside and run, and how much of our communities are really investing in those types of parks and public space. It's limited. And so there's all these challenges that parents face, even though they really, of course, want the best for their children.
So it's multi-level problem according to you, and not necessarily own choice of the people which are stuck with this problem.
Well, one thing that Wendy touched on is this idea of food deserts, especially growing up I didn't grow up in an urban area, but individuals living in urban areas were called designated as food deserts, where you can't get fresh food, you can't go to a grocery store, but you have fast food options, and so you've got those structures already in place that are limiting the individual's access to health and healthy choices.
Well, yes, it's we think that the fact that you can say food infrastructure or healthy food infrastructure is low in some places. I experience it even by myself because I live in a place where there's a fast food option near my hotel can generate this problem. Okay.
Were you asking me a question?
I'm very weak. Do you consider clear that the fact that there are such healthy food deserts, places where there's no other option than fast food. Well, do you have any ideas how it could be solved? Because I think it's.
I think it's a greater issue. So if we're looking at other problems, so in terms of kind of what we have laid out here, option one, as we're discussing, deals with it being more individual family responsibility. So I think it more lies in schools and policy, government, community infrastructure. Because there's a limit to individual.
So you're saying what basic aspect of kind of a food desert is you're taking the opportunities away from those individuals.
Yeah.
So something beyond the individual has to kind of solve that.
Exactly. Yes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, I think we have to because the time.
Yeah, we can stop there, bro.
Time is running. We have to get to the other.
You're just doing approach one. Show the approach two, and then
Okay.
But we can stop now if you want. I mean, we have enough to kind of work with.
So we
or you can go a little bit longer.
So we are making the frozen pharma like the cure.
Yeah. You can get, so you're saying go to the second point. Yeah. I mean, we have 6 minutes, so we're going to do 10.
Okay.
So do a little bit more.
The next statement that's the problem of parents. Yeah. Can we find any place for parental care and their involvement in the process? Maybe it is the problem of some family interrelations and the lack of the time for children, for the family. Do you have any ideas about such attitude?
Yeah, that's what you do now.
Okay, so I think that's when it comes to families, the problems are pretty the same because of the lack of health food, because of lack of opportunities to buy one, or poverty, bad habits. So I think it's very similar, and there's not really different between individual, personal responsibility and family responsibility.
Are you sure that it's only the financial problem that?
No, I'm not. But it's a big factor. One of them. I think. All right. Thank you for your involvement. And Raquel, maybe you can add something to.
Well, I mean, did you have something?
I don't make you made on purpose.
Yes, I mean, I agree that parents have a key role in addressing childhood obesity, but I also think you have to think of culture, and there are cultures that when you want to like hug someone, instead of hugging somebody, they give you something to eat. So sometimes it's not only the cause, and it's not only it's not that they want their children to be fat, it's just that that's how you respond. Or if people come over and you want to show them that you love having them over, then you do a big meal, right? And it's very complex.
So it can be a cultural matter of sharing affection, yeah.
I'm Argentinian, so I always tell people that you have to have dessert. I mean, it's a part. You cannot like finish a meal and not have something sweet, So it goes against my culture to not have ice cream every day.
Okay, I stick one precious opinion.
No, I don't want to speak.
No, I'm a parent, and I think that a parent's duty is actually to have a healthy child. So and I know that it's very difficult because I also want to make my child happy. So I give him food, I give him sweets because he likes it. On the other hand, I have to balance really what amount is enough to be happy and how to react and how to too much.
So-
How to explain.
So we're responding to
If I, how to explain if I give too much, it's not healthy for him and it's not good for his future and so on and so on.
so
It's just, I think as a parent, it's a kind of finding balance. How to explain and how to make someone happy.
So we're corresponding to what Rockwell says, to the way of showing the parent or sometimes.
Grandparents, they like to.
Okay, we've got another quite important point here. What about the stigmatism? Yeah? If we focus on obesity, if we say the child don't eat so much, you are fat or something, aren't we achieving a little bit different goal than we want to achieve? If we look at the definition of health, of World Health Organization, it says that it's a state of well-being without giving any medical parameters. So, what about this stigmatism? Maybe we should say if someone is hungry or has pleasure from eating sweets, let him eat it. Maybe at least as long as it's a child. Some people say he will grow up and eat food.
I think there's a fallacy of logic in that statement. I also study stigma, so I think what we're looking at is there's a relationship between obesity and stigma, but which way does that relationship work? And so essentially what this is saying, if you focus on obesity, that will lead to stigma, which will lead to more bullying and more issues of mental health. But does it work the other way around? I think there's value in it, but I think that there's some fallacy in the way that it's constructed.
So how would it work the other way around?
Potentially that
That people are eating because of bullying or mental health problems?
yeah, or so I see it as so it's saying like if we focus too much on obesity, that will lead to stigma, but I think the stigma is already there. I think it's already.
Yeah, but maybe we are adding additional one. Maybe if we won't mention this, no one will observe this. Maybe
It's already in society though, right? Like, so that's obesity is a sticky issue. It's a wicked problem.
Alright, let's go. We hit 13 minutes. Let's stop there, right? Get you off the hook a little bit. So let me ask you first. How did you feel? Did you?
At first, quite uncomfortable. I think you all were able to see that. I think it was much easier when I didn't have to moderate it so strong. Yeah. So when there's somewhere in the middle, there was such my comfort point here of the discussion when you were asking questions to the others and answering yourself. I think it was the correct place for me as a case leader. Well, I have to practice.
Others don't you all think about specific moves they made or questions or?
My colleague, sometimes he was overtaking discussion. So
I felt the question of time. And I want to go to the next, and so I know that.
Yeah, well, one of your last questions was about 1.5 minutes for the question, right? That you were kind of talking, and you got there, and you asking a good question, right? And that's something, again, an assignment that the students have to watch themselves, and they have to pick out 8 interventions. Like one way to think about facilitation is the conversations are between the people. So anytime the facilitator talks, it's an intervention, right? They're intervening in the conversation. So they had to actually transcribe an intervention and then talk about, hey, why did you do that? And did it work? And now that you think about it, would you do it differently or whatever? And sometimes it's the same thing. The question was like, they asked 7 questions before they actually stopped talking in a way. And the final question was good, so they had to kind of get there in a way. So some of I think you asked good questions and you got good interaction, but some of them kind of took a little longer than probably necessary in a way, right? So a couple of things that you did, just to kind of talk about, right? You were kind of systematically walking through it, right? Which can be one way to do it, right? That is kind of that depth versus breadth thing, right? So more is like, here's some ideas, instead of here's the first statement, react to it, here's the second statement, react to it, here's the third statement, react to it, right? That normally we would just kind of open it up, like, which of those 4 statements jumps out at you? So then you're letting the group kind of decide, and you probably don't have time to talk about every single one of them systematically, right? Second, you called on people specifically, right? Which worked in some ways, right? Everyone responded to.
Raise my hand.
Okay.
Just sort of
Well, they call you just call you out, and they also call the call out, right?
Even was not
No, call, not you.
She wasn't speaking to last year.
Yeah, and that's, I talked earlier, like, we don't normally do that. I'm not saying it's the right thing to not do it in a sense, right? So I don't know if him calling you, or he called you once.
Ashley and I raised our hands and said, "Oh, we call it or Cal."
Yeah, right. So I don't know. I think sometimes putting people on the spot get some talking and get some going in a sense. But then I don't know if you felt uncomfortable being called out, if you weren't ready to speak or what, or either one of y'all. But
No, it's fine. I'm quiet. I'm introverted. So if somebody calls on me, I will speak. And I do that to my students. When somebody doesn't speak, I intentionally call them. Or if they're speaking, I will intentionally call them and ask them the question. So I don't mind.
And so that, in a classroom, you've been there for a while. It's a longer term kind of thing, right? So then you can always. It's an open question. I think it worked well when it got people talking and that kind of stuff, right? But that's one of those questions: is to what degree do you kind of push people?
Do you think it's a good idea to say, "Oh, this lady in the red jumper should please say something"?
No, the value of doing that is you're getting voices that might not, again, like introvert or that kind of stuff, right? So you're getting new voices in the conversation, particularly if other people have been dominating, right? The problem is that you're putting someone on the spot. They might not feel comfortable speaking. Some people just like to listen to that type of thing, right? So that's where I prefer the move of maybe you can hear from someone we haven't heard from before, which opens up space for someone to fill, and hopefully, again, gets other people talking instead of shutting up the dominators, you're getting other people to talk without putting someone on the spot. If I put someone on the spot, like sometimes I might see a reaction. Someone might say, "Are you trying to get in here?" But I make it easy for them to say, "No, I'm fine," right? But being more direct and make people, there's value to it in some cases, right? So it's not a simple rule to say never call on people, right?
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Positive reinforcement.
All right, so now we're going to do approach 2. So we're going to she's going to do this one for 10 minutes or so.
Let's jump to approach 2. In which it's stated that school smiles take a much stronger role in with childhood basically. And I'm pretty sure all parts are teachers. View of this. Is there someone who would like to share his or her?
I feel so strongly that they need to increase PE in school. I report that my daughters get 20 minutes a day. They're 5 years old. It's ridiculous. And you talk to every teacher that are on the ground. They're saying these children need that activity. It's good for their brain. It's good for academics. But we're so focused on counting academic success and thinking that shows that they're more successful, that we forget that education is such a holistic process. It makes me crazy. Yeah.
I see that for 5-year-olds because they need that activity and get the wiggles out, but would you agree also, like with high school, do high school kids have to have an hour of activity with them?
All the research demonstrates that they need to start school later. We pay no attention to the health of our children and what is good for their learning and their education.
Have the same. I think the role that a school play is critical, and I will go even further. In addition to the PE, I think it should be part of the curriculum. that the children study, because like there have been major changes in the cafeteria food for children, but then they don't understand what these changes have been done, because it was from pigs and now you have to eat the vegetables, but there is no an explanation of why it is that the change is happening. So I think that they have to be the children and the parents, because the changes cannot happen only at the school setting. It has to be a reach out to the parents, to the community, to understand why this is a problem. And it is a problem because 20% of children who are 6 years older, they already are obese or they are overweight. And that's a national epidemic. And like in my role here at the university, I'm changing, I prepare teachers, and one of the components that I have included is the teaching of agriculture so that they can grow their own food, plus also the component that has to do with nutrition, because they need to understand why we have to eat it.
So paraphrasing what you said, it's the role of the school to
It is the role of the school.
behave.
This one concern I have with this is that I think we're expecting too much out of our schools. We're expecting schools to solve all these problems, you know, and part of it is we're having schools kind of play the role of parents and like that. So if schools, we have to teach them the skills and we have to teach them how to eat and we have to give them exercise like that, it's like, then if we want to do that, then we need to increase the time that they're in school. Right? I mean, we've kept school the same amount of time for the last 100 years, and we've added 100 different responsibilities to school. So I think something has to give there in a sense.
Yeah, I think that's
Well, I agree that we should have PE even in high school, and I hated PE when I was in school. But I think it would be good to do it, but not do it as a competitive thing. Oh, you get a grade. Just to exercise. I do think I share your concerns, Martin, but at the same time, it can work. My nephew goes to a school in Washington, D.C. where they serve breakfast and they serve lunch, and it follows Lady Michelle Obama's nutritional thing. So his lunches are awesome. I mean, I have never seen lunches like that. And yes, you do have to be there earlier. They start the day much earlier because they have breakfast, and then they have lunch, and then he stays because his parents work. They have after-school programs. He loves sports, and they just lucked out. So he does sports in the afternoon, and then he goes home. So it can work, but it's a lot of investment into that school. And why is it done in Washington, D.C.? Because that school is very, in general, not every child is very poor, but the majority is very poor. So then they're investing in that, and not only the government, but also the private sector, right? So who donates a lot of money or a lot of, like at Christmas, he gets a Christmas gift, and it comes from the companies in Washington, D.C. So I don't know, but it doesn't happen everywhere.
I think it's a very interesting point. If someone would like to add something to that.
Yeah, I think the role of the school have changed. Now children spend most of their awakening period at the school. So they go to schools in some instance at 7:30 in the morning and they get picked up at 5 in the afternoon. So the school, they eat breakfast, they eat lunch at the school, and a snack in the afternoon. So I think yes, the school have a major role to play here.
But I think we should also put attention to trade-offs, as Martin pointed out.
So you can punch the placement. So there's 4 ideas here. Any other reaction to the other? We've been primarily talking about the 4th, which is increased PE, right? So you can pick one of the other ones, or you can just say, of these 3 other ideas, any responses to those? Right?
I know that Ray Gardner participating in this program called Urban Harvest, And it's great because yes, it takes class time, but while they're learning about how to grow good food and what that means, a connection to their environment, they're also learning about science. They're writing journals about it. So I think there's a way that you can integrate this and not take away from class time because you're thinking creatively, you're thinking outside of the box about how to teach subjects in a way that's new and creative.
Maybe that's a little bit different idea to the one which was represented here, but maybe we should talk less about teaching children and start talking about teaching parents. How they because I think what kind of knowledge can even very well performed classes at school have if there will be no support from home. I think it's without a strong support from parents, from observations of family life, it would remain a subject like theoretical astrophysics to those children. They would have knowledge without the possibility, without the ability of putting it into practice.
So I think part of the design of those nutrition and health classes is for the student to take it home, and they often have flyers to take home. They want the student to put pressure on the parents to say, like, wow, we don't have any vegetables. We need to have lots of vegetables now. But then I imagine there's some pushback at there at home, right? Like, do I want my kid telling me what they know?
Mother says, here are French fries, there are little potatoes. Those are other things.
Just ketchup that counts, right?
I had a friend who, for dinner, they had hot dogs and French fries, and we never had hot dogs and French fries for dinner. So I was always jealous, but. But now, did you hear about the teacher that saw that the student was eating chocolate, or something with chocolate, and she sent a note to the father and said that he needed to provide a better lunch for his daughter, and he put it on, on Facebook and everything, and was absolutely angry, furious. How dare they comment on the lunch?
I think the idea of involving the parents is must because like Wendy was saying about including in the curriculum, that's what we are doing and it's working really good. The idea that every other week there is an information going to the parents telling what we are doing and why we are doing it, I think it is really working better for parents. It's also, for parents, it's kind of hard in a way because it's easier to stop, get fast food and take it home. It's cheaper also. And then they have dinner ready. They don't have to do it. So and then the children will eat it. That's another thing also. The changes have to happen, but everybody in the community needs to get involved.
I saw the general one.
Yeah, I think it's something where the schools need to be more involved, but more than I think the other two approaches we've talked or we'll be talking about, they really kind of walk a thin line because, first of all, you have the inherent issues with, say, more passive things like changing food offerings or banning junk food. Kids have this wonderful knack for being inventive, and if the junk food's not at school, they're going to find a way to get the junk food. And if not sneaking it into school, then at home.
According to Black Marco.
And then there's also very strong, if the school decides to make this an anti-obesity effort as opposed to a more holistic nutritional effort, it makes for, as someone who can speak from experience, being a fat kid in high school sucks. Same with elementary school. And if suddenly the school is making a concerted effort to say, this condition is wrong, it only makes the condition worse for those students. And if it's framed in such a way that it cuts out parental involvement, says, you know what, we're going to try to solve the problem here at school, parents probably aren't going to much cotton to that either. So the schools, I think they do have a very strong role to play here, but they are walking such a thin line in all possible aspects of this. It's almost impossible for them to play the role they need to play.
Well, one experience we had with our elementary school trying to do some of these things, of trying to kind of go with the ban junk food in schools, right? The problem is healthy food is often more expensive, not always, right? But also it doesn't last as long. right? So if they're gonna, we're gonna have salads and things like that. Well, if the students aren't eating the salad, and then the salad only lasts a couple days, right? Especially if the candy bars sell, and they make money. The schools are already stretched for money, So there's there are tough things in there that it's easy to say we're just gonna have healthy food at school, but actually making that work is a challenge.
Great. So we have more time.
Yeah, we'll stop there. So how did you feel? We kind of took off and.
I wanted to add something. My personal opinion, it was very difficult, actually. And I suppose I would have problems with people who dominate in the discussion. I would, possibly I would have problems to stop them. Not you, but let's go to another person.
Well, I think the discussion was quite natural.
Well, but it was, you were so engaged.
We got into that a little bit. We forgot we were in the training. We're like,
I tried once.
you bear friends and you ask you move. I mean, your interventions were all very good, right? And it got to and this is the tough part about training us. Like this group, they're all very intelligent people in some senses, and my students kind of the same thing, right? So when the students are trying to facilitate a group, it's like we're almost the best group, right? So if it was an actual true facilitation, you wouldn't have done much because we were reacting to each other, and we were recognizing the tensions and stuff on our own. So you wouldn't need to jump in as much, right? But then we're training, so we want you to jump in because we want you to practice. So that's where we kind of struggle with this. I'll pass this out as well. Normally we do this twice on our training. So we do it once, they get an example, then we split them up so they're a completely different group, so they feel comfortable not saying the exact same thing we said last time or stealing an idea from somebody. But then we give them a list of we do role plays. Right, so we have 10 different role plays. So then now it kind of gets away. You have a little more to work with because you have lots of different opinions. Right, that's the other thing is when I'm working with my students, my school is a typical kind of 4-year that most of the college students are full-time students and just out of high school. So they're very similar, right? So we have to kind of do some role plays just to get some different perspectives in the room and to make the practice kind of facilitation work a little bit more. So you see some of those. Going back to the grown zone graphic, right? NIF does a good job, I think, of the first 2 steps, right? It does a good job because it's framed broadly in lots of different ideas, right? For us to think about a lot of different ideas, right? And it is a mechanism to help us kind of, work through the grown zone some, of seeing the tensions and seeing the way it's framed. But NIF doesn't do a good job in the back end, right? And it's typically framed, I think the NIF books, especially it's national issues forum. Like most of them are framed as a national issue. So it's rare that in 2 hours a group of 8 people are going to come up with solutions to a national problem, really, right? So NIF models, or the booklets in particular, are more about educational, right? We still use the NIF model in terms of a common problem with 3 approaches, but we can do more in the back end if it's a local issue, right? There's local actors, it's a manageable issue, but then that's always an add-on to the deliberative process, right? So we do the 3 approaches, and then during the reflections, then we say, okay, now we have this conversation. What do we do, So if you're getting a sense from these examples of conversation, it's like, okay, we're coming up with tensions, but we're not figuring out what to do with them.